Hello and welcome back to PA Chalk Up. I'm your host Manny, and today we have Bo. Hi Bo, how we doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
It's all good. This episode has been a long time in the making, but I'm glad that we finally get to sit down and chat a little bit. So before we get going, if you give us a little breakdown of how you got into this industry and how it sort of has progressed since then.
Sure. Probably like every young college student went into school having no idea of what I was getting a degree in or why. I'm sure there's some that might have a premeditated plan. I wasn't one of them. Shortly into my college career, honestly, right before my first semester started, I started getting exposed to athletics via applying to an on-campus job. I was cutting grass out at the softball and baseball fields, and that led to an equipment manager position as a means to just make some side cash. I had an academic scholarship, and eventually that experience led me to observing the baseball and softball teams training in the weight room. And then that led to more inquiry and wanting to understand who's coaching them, what they were doing, and why they were doing it. And then a kind of discovery of like, wow, this is a profession. This might be a cool thing to earn a living in. I ended up pursuing the rest of my undergrad years pursuing volunteer internships both at Northwestern State, Louisiana, and then later on I transferred to Southern Mississippi. So I interned and volunteered the entirety of my undergrad prior to getting a graduate assistantship and really getting to get some more formal responsibilities as more of a full-time coach during my graduate studies at Southern Miss. And after 2 years of that, started kind of chipping away at the industry, starting with entry-level positions. Um, Worked at some small NAIA colleges. Had some time at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. Got some Power Five experience at the University of Michigan, and then kind of as that my experience kind of accumulated, and I started to get more exposure to combat sports and weight classification sports. Ended up getting a pretty special opportunity with the UFC Performance Institute in 2017 upon its construction in Las Vegas, and really focusing in on combat athletes, particular MMA athletes. And then in 2021, had an itch to want to get closer to home and still seeking other leadership opportunities, and took an assistant athletic director role at Texas A&M University, where I am now. I transitioned about 8 months ago into an academic role, teaching in the master's program here alongside Dr. Brian Mann, master's strength and conditioning program here at A&M. So I'm a little over a semester into my teaching career now. That's been a blast on top of heavily active on the consulting side of the industry. So I started a small consulting business about 3 years ago with consulting with engineering firms and private equity holders and private companies building performance facilities. My experience in all these different avenues has given me the opportunity to be a part of the construction and design process in a number of different high performance facilities over the years. And so putting that experiential knowledge to work, as a lot of these groups that are building these, they have some vision, but they don't have a lot of the detailed intricacies of what needs to go into it from a foresight and longevity and durability standpoint. So I started doing that a few years ago. And then most recently started a company with three other partners, that's more of a tier one online strength and conditioning company. It's going to have several verticals. The first vertical that we're kind of going down is this outdoor adventure space. But that company is called Workbuilt. So that's a new one that here in the last 10 months we've been formulating and looking to launch later this summer. So really excited about that one. But yeah, as far as like the performance world, as I've evolved in my career and continue to, I'll never be outside the performance world. It's just a matter of where I find myself adding value to it in different areas. So here we are.
With the sort of three big avenues that you're currently chasing and following, what's something that's really firing you up to keep pushing, to keep progressing these avenues? This is a quick shout out to our main sponsor on this channel, TeamBuilder. TeamBuilder is all-in-one platform that hosts programs, questionnaires, testing, anything that you may need for your athlete's performance, you can host it in TeamBuilder. TeamBuilder also now has two different sides, which is OS and Practice. For more information on TeamBuilder, check out the link in the description. And if you use code PAChalkup all together, you will get a 30-day free trial.
Yeah, I mean, I think well, if you just silo into the athletic human performance space, um, most athletes, at least ambitious, high achievers, and even I would say sport coaches, ambitious, high achievers, they're seeking top tier. They're seeking high standards usually. Not all of them. There are definitely some that hide and just want to earn a paycheck and kind of go and compete and whatever. But at the highest end of standards, they're usually looking for um, refinement and elite and consistency. And so I'm looking for the same thing, and I've always had an affinity to wanting to be a part of entities like that. And so I've never been overly particular about genres or who the subject matter is or anything like that. But there's folks seeking information. I've always found myself having a high affinity to wanting to be a source of that information, being a little bit of a conduit. And the performance space is just where I figured out that I can do that, and I've been pretty successful at it. So as long as I can still find a niche in assisting and helping people, there's always going to be people out there looking for good information. So I used to think it was only competitive athletes looking for good information. And the more I ventured out into just the general public and different tiers and levels of working class adults, it's everywhere. I've said it to a lot of my students over and over again. Right now, in this day and age, there are more opportunities for performance professionals than there ever have been in all different levels of the working class. Of course, there's a whole, echelon of athletics and performance related events. It's branched far beyond just your traditional Western sports. Sporting cultures now into things like rodeo and auto racing, and different equine events. I mean, there's human performance everywhere that you turn around. Then you start getting into physically demanding professions, such as firemen and pararescue jumpers and military and first responders and emergency personnel. Um, there's a need for durability, longevity, and performance all across the board. So it's an exciting field to be in, and if you have an affinity to wanting to help folks, there's a lot out there that are seeking it.
100%. When you say that, so I also do more private stuff. I've got a couple videographers as well, which is like it's one of those industries that like I mean you carry heavy equipment constantly, so it's one of those that still also is there's different ways of thinking about it. Um,
Sure.
with uh, with the sort of outdoors personnel that you're talking about, how are you preparing them for these longer hunts or these longer where they're having to stay constantly alert, constantly moving and still keeping that pace up the whole time?
Yeah. Part of what we're offering training and organized training, so strategizing and structuring training based off the terrain, the location, the duration, the time they have to prepare prior to departure, environmental conditions and things along those lines. So we're offering planning for those things, but then the other side of it is gets down to some of the strategy on how to, which some of my counterparts are arguably some of the best in the world at doing that in some of the most adverse scenarios. Um, and so we plan to offer not only planning and actual training programs, but an educational platform to coincide with that. So in the beginning, we're going to start with once monthly webinars for our patrons, which are live Q&A, pretty much open forum. We can dive into any rabbit hole you want to. You've got open access to the practitioners that are actually building your programs. We found that to be a deficit in the online industry is not a lot of these patrons don't have direct access to the personnel that are building their programs. There are some that are out there, but there's few and far between. Um, and then the other is once quarterly live seminars. So bringing our patrons to a live location and jumping down some of those similar rabbit holes and getting into much more technical nuance of execution with whatever types of training that they're doing. So more of like a 2-3 day weekend workshop that's live. Um, and so it's an educational platform just as much as a hair buy this program and execute it. Um, and then, the sort of niche, the need is that there's a lot of programming out there. The market is pretty saturated. We did a pretty thorough market analysis before we decided to dive into this. And the thing that is on the lower end, or there's not very much of it, is when it comes to practitioners with longevity and expertise. So more than 20 years of experience in a multitude of genres and scenarios. And that's what our team kind of brings to the table is a variety of experiences with a variety of sporting and human performance cultures with a lot of agileness and tactfulness when it comes to planning and strategizing periodization schemes based on what someone's trying to do. The other big thing is just meeting them where they're at. When you get into the general public, there's more than just, a 4 year tier, a quadrennial tier of college athletes. Everything from a, postpartum 23-year-old mother to a 68-year-old who's had 4 careers already, tons of mileage on their body with an ambitious mind to go and tackle some new venture, and then everything in between. So versatility is pretty critical to be able to meet them where they're at and also fulfill their needs and desires and what they're trying to achieve. Some of it's more performance goal related. Some of it's just strictly longevity. And hey, I want to be able to play with my grandkids and be a little bit more physically on demand whenever I need to be. Um, and then we provide specific strategies, not only like what to do, but how to do it. So the execution piece, even in elite college weight rooms, professional athletic weight rooms, the difference between the great and the okay boils down to execution. And there's levels to instruction. And so that's where we find ourselves to be competitive in this sort of virtual and online field is adding several layers of the how when it comes to the execution side. A lot of things that a lot of folks typically leave out when it comes to instruction, even in live scenarios. Um, and so we plan to bring a lot of that to this platform. So we're working with a pretty innovative web developer who's helping us build out our web app and our website because we want to heavily overlay those educational pieces onto the actual programming. So it's a fun and ambitious project, but it's challenging to kind of because essentially what we're trying to do is replicate the closest thing possible to having Bo Sandoval standing right in front of you, coaching you live. That's our goal.
Yeah, I'm always very fascinated with the process of elite coaching and elite teaching. So what I mean by that is like, so I've listened to Brian Mann speak a few times, and I've been with him. I know Brian well, and he has this perfect way of teaching where it's kind of like he's having a conversation with you but louder, right? How how do you manage this balance between the practical and the theory?
Yeah. Um, 25 years of coaching experience. It's all practical. There's no theory here. In fact, that's why Brian Mann kind of brought me into the academic side here at Texas A&M. They were actually creating positions called professors of practice, which bring experiential knowledge to the academic setting. So now you have someone lecturing in front of you who's actually lived it, who actually is an active live practitioner, not just someone going off of peer-reviewed studies, which are, it's valuable. That's where I got my foundational information from when I started cultivating these systems and building out my methodology. You have to start somewhere with some legitimacy, right? So research is really important when it comes to that. But at the end of the day, students paying as much as they pay for college education these days, they want to know they've got a source standing in front of them that's actually done it and found where the hiccups are and how to get around the speed bumps and working through some of the troubleshooting so they can go and actually apply some of this stuff in a live scenario when someone's cutting them a paycheck for it. So that to me, you mentioned the difference between coaching and teaching. To me, if you're unable to teach, your coaching is flawed. Instruction has to come with education. And so, if you don't have the depth of knowledge to be able to support what you're claiming from a practical execution standpoint, I feel like you're doing a disservice. And so, we try to overlay the two heavily. There's never just a here, do this without some rationale and strategy on why it's there at that particular time, and how it ties in and interlaces with the other components of the program. Not just the program, but the fuel sources, the logistics, the restorative qualities. In fact, we are going through a series of questionnaires because we don't advise anyone buying any of our programs if they don't have basic foundations of recovery methods, which there's a lot of working class adults that don't know how to eat and don't know how to sleep. And I say that in a patronizing way because yes, they do know how to consume calories. Yes, they do know how to lay their head down at night. But when it comes to sleep hygiene and efficacy of fueling intake, or even just perceiving their food as fuel versus perceiving their food as enjoyment, um, it's different. I mean, hell, it's like pulling teeth just to get those points across in operational in a college scenario, which has tons of resources, or a professional sports league scenario, which has tons of resources, let alone someone who's trying to do it on their own. But that has to be a heavy component to it. I always ask the question, like, even if I write an elite program and I can get elite execution out of them, are we finding optimal efficacy if they have subpar nutrition and subpar sleep hygiene? My answer is always going to be no. So if we want to find the next level of performance outcome with that individual, we've got to be able to educate and upgrade those pieces as well.
100%. And I think it's something to be said about there's a lot of researchers and people that think like, okay, strength and conditioning is one thing, biomechanics is another thing, physiology is a different thing, and like we're all different sort of aspects of human performance, but it's a bit more blended than that. Like if I'm teaching or coaching, like there's a certain level of biomechanics that I need to know. There's a certain level of physiology that I need to know. There's a certain level of psychology I need to know. Like it doesn't just end where my degree is or my accreditations are. It's like, okay, how can I push beyond, say, like, again, it kind of goes back to the first questions I ask my athletes or clients is, have you ate? Have you drank? Did you sleep well? None of which are performance questions.
Yeah. I mean, in a lot of reality, they are performance questions, right?
Yes.
I mean, you can buy the Ferrari and it's got the engine, it's got the wheels, it's got the geometry. Um, Depending on what fuel is in it and how much fuel is in it, depending on the driver and how strategized the driver is, like you won't get the performance out of that vehicle. It's very deceiving in college athletics as well because we're talking about a demographic that's 18 to, well, it used to be 18 to 22 years old. Now it's 26 and 27 and whatever else years old. But they're in the most adaptable form of their body that they're ever going to be in. They can eat like shit. They can cut corners on sleep. They can drink tons of alcohol, and they can still show up the next morning and jump a 40-inch vertical and run a 4.3 and a half 40-yard dash and bench press 225 41 times. that it's undefeated. We've seen them do it again time and time again. So you can't just measure your program efficacy based off of those numbers because you're talking about the most durable and resilient time frame in a young man or young lady's life. Try that same thing with the 40-year-old veteran who's playing, their 18th year in the league. You run into some different problems, some different walls. And then to say that we can't elevate the ceiling height of performance if we fix some of those behavioral problems early on, so that when they are 40, they've got a bit more of some breathing room in some of those areas. I don't think we've found it yet. I don't think we've found optimal. Um, and there's a many different reasons on all the challenges logistically and personnel wise. But when you were talking about how you got to know a little bit about biomechanics, you got to have a little bit about psychology, but all these different things. I'm actually giving a lecture at a regional conference for the NSCA here in a few weeks, and it's on integration, performance integration. And it's funny you say that because every practitioner really should have some familiarity with all of those different things. But they should also have multiple counterparts that are supplementing those various things in this very cohesive manner. Um, Not, a lot of our modeling, unfortunately, these days, integration is having a meeting with your dietitian once a week or having a meeting with your coaching staff once a week. In my ideal scenario, you're rubbing elbows every day, minute by minute. There are ongoing conversations on how we're steering the boat. It's run more like a sailboat. On a sailboat, all 12 members are constantly working the boat. There's not one person on the steering wheel. They're constantly shifting and trading spots and maneuvering around to keep the thing on track and keeping speed appropriate. Um, that's kind of my how I envision when it comes to an athlete centered model. While I may have some familiarity in some of those other areas, I won't always have the expertise to drive strategy specifically in those areas, but I'll know enough to ask the right questions when it comes to those areas. I'll also know enough to be able to supplement my area into some of those interventions in some of those other areas. So the integration piece is really important. And, this day and age too, especially in the private sector of the stuff, we find a lot of practitioners rationalizing why they don't need formal education or rationalizing why they don't need book smarts or understanding different research topics. And I think they're doing a disservice to those that they're charging money to because they don't have a familiarity to ask the correct questions or to seek help in areas that they don't have expertise in, among many other reasons. But yeah, that integration of all these factors is extremely critical if you're going to really help someone reach a new objective or new level of objective.
100%. So I'm a product of Ron McKeefery. I was out there when he was at
Sorry to hear
UW,
that.
and I mean,
Just
we
kidding,
still
Ronnie, if you're
call
listening.
each other like once a month, at least. And he's always been very open with us, and he's like,
Lost you.
I hire for things that I'm not. I see what I lack, and I hire based on that. So like everything that I do is sort of based on building this optimal machine. So the thing that he was always open and honest about was the his hiring process, and it's like he's always hiring on skills that he isn't an expert at, and I think that's a brilliant way of wording it because it's like, okay, I also have to know my limitations, and I need to hire based on making this program the best, not necessarily showing my ego what I can and can't do. Um, so like that's always sort of played in my mind when I look at coaching people and taking new clients on. Is like, and again, this podcast helps a bunch because we're 129 episodes in of speaking to different coaches, and I'm just constantly learning. Um, but it is what you're saying. It's like you constantly have to keep sharpening that tool, grasping new concepts and how you interpret it as well. That's what I found really interesting recently.
Yeah, it's definitely a field that I mean we're still tipping the iceberg. I mean, we're creeping up on 60, 70 years in this field, but it's still relatively new when you look in the grand scheme of things. So the evolution is quite a bit. Now, look, there's a lot of concepts that we don't have too many more in terms of earth-shattering discoveries about the human body. Um, but I think we have a millennium or so to learn on better organizational structures of how we manipulate training and evolve training and strategize based on very individual context. We're constantly refining how we do that. The difficulty with that is we work in a lot of environments and we grow, we cut our teeth, and we grow in a lot of environments that don't always afford us um, the ability to be very granular with the individual until we get into like some more of these either hyper professional or private sector sort of entities where you've got this one individual and a team around one individual. So it takes some time to be able to accumulate the experience to be able to dive in at that level. Um, but yeah, we've if you have a growth mindset and you're hungry for knowledge, and that's a great field to be in because it's never going to stop coming. New information comes out literally every quarter.
I mean, two good points to make on that is when so me, Coach Mac, and Brian Mann had dinner together when they were across in the UK, and I asked them like, with the amount of sort of conferences and speaking engagements and events that you have attended, like I still see them writing notes. Like, what are they writing notes? So, like I asked, like, what is it that you're getting out of these nowadays? And both of them sort of came up with the same answer, and it was like it's not necessarily learning new things; it's learning better and quicker processes for those things. So it's like it's that efficiency model. Like, okay, I already know how to get from A to B, but how can I shorten the length of A to B? And again, organization is key. When I was with Coach Mac, I mean, I saw how much he was running. Like, not only did he have the weight room, he had the coaches, he had the everything to deal with. He was putting out fires, he was programming, he was doing everything. And I asked him, like, how? How do you keep up with it? And he showed me a system, and I was like, it was Trello. He runs his life off Trello. And I'm like, fair.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's well, that's one thing that experience. Everyone's like, oh, how do I gain more experience? How do I gain more experience? It's because it's important. They're striving to gain experience because experience gives you refinement. It gives you, you're talking about that distance between A and B, your experience cuts that down. What used to be a prolonged thought process, now it's an instant decision making process because you've already lived it dozens of times. So experience is undefeated. I feel like there's no trump for experience. You got to have knowledge. There's no doubt about it. But it can't stand alone. There's got to be some operational experience along with it to help you weaponize it and also be a bit more precise with how you use that knowledge. Being a bit
Yeah,
more of a surgeon versus just a if you just walk into a library, like there's a lot of knowledge in a library. If you don't know specifically which book spine to go and pull on, that library can drown you pretty quick.
I so I kind of wrote this down as on my notes because I kind of wanted to bring back to it, and this is the perfect segue to it. But how do you feel your experience coming through, sort of doing basic gardening work for, and then going and doing equipment management, and then sort of progressing down that line? How do you think those experiences and processes helped you get to where you are now?
Yeah, I would say there are definitely a lot of benefits from it. I'll get into that. One of the things that allowed me to yield those benefits, and I've always naturally been a little bit of a social butterfly. I can talk to that wall for hours. So, the ability to just talk and chit chat and listen to people. I love sitting and listening to old people tell stories. And, most people are like, oh, this old guy's talking again. I can't, I'm opposite. And so during COVID, I was on the verge of depression just because I didn't have the social interaction with people as frequently. So Dr. Duncan French, who was my boss at the time at the UFC, I would call him and be like, Dunk, I just need to talk for like an hour because uh, not being around people is just starting to irritate the shit out of me. And well, using that as I was gaining responsibility, I would talk to everyone. I would talk to coaches. I would talk to groundskeepers. I would talk to equipment personnel. I would talk to everybody. And you start to put together a clearer picture of what's going on around you, a better awareness of things. During those different jobs, the biggest thing it afforded me is learning time management skills. I was juggling a lot of things because even as I was taking care of the grounds for the softball and baseball fields, I was doing laundry. I was going down and observing in the weight room. I had my full curriculum load as an undergraduate student. I was going to practices. I was traveling for games. So time management was a big one. Um, Observing leadership and responsibility hierarchy when you watch how those softball and baseball and even our football staffs how they operate in terms of your higher tier of management down to your entry level positions of management. So all that stuff was playing a role in how I was cultivating my work ethic, my timeliness, my attention to detail. So when I finally actually started getting into the meat and potatoes of the S&C work, I already had a little bit of an expectations or standard of operation for myself set from being around some of those elite personnel in different operational responsibilities. Um, and then, parenting. My parents were a tremendous influence on me. And so, in a positive way. And I had those parents that were like, "Hey, you treat the janitor the same way you treat the president of the company. Like, get to know all of them." When I first came on at the UFC, I mean, the first thing that I did was greet the janitorial staff every morning and have a cup of coffee and shoot the shit. And I did that down to my last day when I left the company in 2021. Um, and there's a lot of benefits to that because you just gain a greater scope of what's going on, and where your influence is being optimized and where you might find some other opportunities to be influential. So yeah, there are a lot of benefits in working on all those different tiers. The other thing is when you're young and you're doing that, everyone there knows more than I do when you first start out. Like, so you can either choose to accept that and just start soaking it up like a sponge, or walk around with a chip on your shoulder like you got something to prove. It's harder to absorb information when you're doing that.
100%. I think you'll appreciate this. So I'm Portuguese and I'm from Portugal. And we have this phrase that translates to you can learn something from everyone, even a dumb person. You can learn not to be them. And it's kind of this concept of like speak to anyone, learn as much as you can from anyone, because at some point that will become useful. Um, Again, I like to do a bunch of different stuff. So there was a period of time where I got into coding. So I was like making websites, making little bits and bobs. And I ran across this theory, which is the rubber duck theory. And it's kind of like what you described with your wall, where it's like if I have an issue, or in this case, a programming issue, I explain the program to this rubber duck. If I can justify and walk through it code by code or line by line, one, I'm becoming better at understanding what I'm doing, and B, I can identify faults or problems quicker because I'm having to justify everything. So it's again, it's like learning these little processes to refine everything.
Definitely, definitely.
I will also say I've not yet had the pleasure of sitting down with Duncan French, but I've spoken with a lot of the staff in the UFCPI, and the way that that system works is insane.
It is. I mean, it's the closest thing to a fully integrated system that I've been around or observed or heard of. I know there's a lot of others out there that are really striving to try to achieve that, even with, in some of our more well-funded military groups, and it's a struggle. It's because it's so reliant on leadership vision and governance. Um, And so that's where it's unique at the UFC. You have a leader like Duncan who, I mean, he's been a practitioner both as a sports scientist and a strength and conditioning coach. Um, uh, and now he's in more of this management sort of hierarchical, he's putting pieces in place so that they can integrate well with each other. And it takes a unique person with a unique background to be able to do it. Especially with such a vast company like the UFC. I mean, there's almost 700 fighters globally in that league. And it's helping with the expanse now, building multiple PIs in different regions. I mean, it helps a little bit, but what really makes it work is this organized, integrated approach that comes from the top down, even from the construction of things. I mean, they're built in a way to where practitioners are literally butt to butt every day. I shared a wall with my PT that was made out of glass. I mean, we were up each other's butt literally every day. My sports scientists, we were elbow to elbow every day. So you didn't have to set a meeting aside to go and talk about a particular case. Um, you were breathing the
Yeah.
same air every minute. Yep, yep,
Um, Something else that I kind of wanted to bring back, and it's something that you mentioned earlier. You talked about this execution and how like that almost matters more than anything else currently. What's your process in this execution piece, and like, do you have some checklists that mentally have to get checked through to be pushed out?
sure. Um, yeah, I'm a firm believer that um, um, accurate execution always supersedes any sort of loading or progression. You have to be able to execute the skill first in a very foundational, fundamental level before we add any sort of variable or tweak any variable to it. So I don't believe in arbitrary completion. Just completing reps for the sake of volume getting dumped into the system. To me, that's junk volume. Um, if we're gonna drop something or if we're gonna take something out of the well, it's got to be worth it, especially in a competitive athlete. Every ounce of energy spent has to be worth it. Um, Otherwise, I believe they should be recovering. If we're going to do something that's a waste of energy, we should just be resting. Go take a nap. Um, so I often use a lot of phrases like positional accuracy governs load. And that doesn't mean load just in terms of weight. Positional accuracy, it's going to govern the rate of speed that we work at. It's going to govern the difficulty of the skill that we're doing. Positional accuracy is going to govern all of that first. And so I believe in clearly identifying the learning curve separate from the progressive training curve. And so I do understand and I validate that there are learning curves that happen in tandem with some progression, but the majority of the foundational learning curve should be achieved prior to progressively overloading something. If someone is trying to figure out mechanical efficiency while they're progressively being loaded, the ability to actually learn or refine that skill, it's going to drop dramatically. Um, and so in doing that, I also look for the low hanging fruit. Now, I'm a big comparison guy. People say, "Oh, don't compare yourself to others." I think that's one of the best ways, best litmus tests you can do, especially if you have a comparison to something that is consistently at the top of the heap. If you're comparing to someone that has long-term consistency at the championship level or at the top tier level. Now, someone makes it to the top tier one time, good on them. Repeat it. When it's repeatable over, okay, now there's something to their recipe that's telling me that they're onto something. Even as their variables change and their context change, they still keep finding themselves at the top. Those are the folks that I want to emulate or compare and figure out where are the gaps in my systems and programs. So I do a lot of comparison. And in doing that, I put people through a lot of mental litmus tests. So any weight room I walk into, right away, I'm looking at behavioral tactics of athletes. I'm looking at behavioral tactics of coaches. And I don't do this because I want to criticize those personnel. I'm doing it because one, I might learn something from them. And two, I can tell right away how well coached someone is or how much neglected someone is. It is pretty astonishing this day and age of how many college weight rooms you can walk into. And I'm talking Power Five, Tier One, multi-million dollar strength staffs, and their athletes don't know how to fundamentally brace with anything. They don't know how to brace with a dumbbell. They don't know how to brace with a barbell. They don't know how to brace when they're doing a maximal vertical jump. This is something that doesn't require equipment. It requires strategy and know-how. That's it. Um, Similar when we get into like things around postural efficiency. You watch someone pick up different implements, you can tell whether or not there's transferability in how they control their posture from one implement to another, or positionally front loaded, posteriorly loaded, below the center of mass, above the center of mass, whatever. You can tell when they have a consciousness around what their posture is doing relative to the load that they're moving or vectors. You can tell when they are educated in vectors of movement because they control their center of mass over their base of support depending on what direction that they're going in. I look for these things because it tells me about how well they've been instructed. If you got 50 people and two of them are doing it well, those are those kind of kids that probably been born with it. They just know this is how, just kind of like a cat. You throw it up in the air, it's always going to land on its feet. We have humans that are like that. Well, when you've got a population of 50, I should see 90% of them doing it well. If you have a paid professional in there that's taking a paycheck that has credentials, those things should be done well. So I'm constantly evaluating those things. I do it with myself. I do it with my own coaches. If someone implements a technique or a strategy, they should be able to tell me front to back where it's from, what's the origin of it, how do you execute it. When I look at, you asked about execution. When I look at execution, I break it down into three simple components. Can you instruct how to enter, how to execute, and how to exit? If you can do those three things, you're on the right track. Then there's levels, there's elite entrance, there's elite execution, and elite exit. So everything in a training scenario demands respect. It demands respect in terms of how you address it. If I'm expected to do this and perform this at a high level, high rate of speed, high load, high frequency, high volume, whatever, I've got to have an approach that addresses it in a very professional manner so that I can execute all my finite details when I'm actually doing whatever the thing is. When I'm done with it, I exit it in a very appropriate manner for efficiency so that I can recover for the next set. So I avoid any potential risks or harm with exiting the implement, but also just so I can show control under fatigue and composure. So if I just panic and dump the bar and storm off, that doesn't really translate to the real world when you execute a skill and you're under fatigue, but you're still expected to have some level of focus so you can move on to the next sequential skill. I equate it a lot to being in a fist fight. Like you can fight your ass off for a better position. And if you achieve that better position, you can't just simply relax and be
Mm.
happy that it's over. Your eyes have to remain wide open. You're breathing under a certain cadence so that you can then strategize and figure out what the next tier of execution needs to be. So, training this way is highly applicable to all things in life. It's maintaining composure. It's having executional standards on how you enter, execute, and exit. Um, and it's repeatability. If someone has consistency and repeatability of an elite skill, man, I can progressively overload the shit out of that. If someone has inconsistent, poor, or inefficient movement patterns, I can load it and we're going to have some shiny days and we're going to have some really dark days. We're going to have some really progressive days and we're going to have some days that look like a plateau. But that's because we're working on an inefficient mover. We're working on someone that can't repeat elite over and over again. I feel like in this day and age, in the world of performance training, we should be able to offer that to our clientele or our patrons in these college athletic scenarios or professional athletic scenarios. Someone is paying me a paycheck to make sure you know how to do things well over and over again. Ultimately, it's my responsibility that you do. I think there's a lot out there that just let people get by with arbitrarily completing things and then recording numbers. We love to record numbers in this industry. Like, oh, his bench went up, regardless of the quality of it. Oh, his sprint time went down, regardless of the quality of it or the relativity of it. So, and I poke at my own self that way. So it's not just about critiquing an industry, it's about critiquing myself because that's the expectation. An athlete stands in front of me and I have the experience behind my name that I have. There's an expectation. This guy should be able to teach me something. This guy should be able to upgrade something on me. And I really take that to heart and take it very seriously.
So I think so. I always have this thing where there has to be a standard and there has to be intent. Like I intentionally coach. If I'm coming in and coaching, I'm putting all my bullshit at the door, and it's about you. And it's having that intentional, and then again, that also drives my athletes and clients to give me the same back for the hour that they're there. Their problems, we can talk about them, but I'm still requiring you to do that set work.
Yeah.
Where where do you think the industry has fell short with not holding this standard across the whole field?
I think one of the biggest things is a lot of mentorship that we offer. Um, it really depends on the mentor, but a lot of mentorships, they don't actually get um, live criticism daily. And that was one of the best things that I got as a young coach. I had some hammers in the industry that weren't afraid to go, hey, man, tell me exactly why you're doing that. And then I would have to defend that almost like a dissertation. I would have to explain, and not because, and it wasn't in a defensive manner. It was they wanted to know what was your thought process? What's the strategy? How does it lace into the next strategy? And it really got me to refine my approach. Those things don't exist as much anymore. Um, it's can you show up on time? Do you work hard? Can I trust you? And those are all important things, right? But at the end of the day, I need to know, dude, are you competent? Are you competent? Are you strategic? Are you agile? Can you read and react to what all the variables are telling you? Um, that's someone I can let loose in the coaching world and go and solve problems and find performance outcomes. Um, so I do think we're lacking some, for lack of a better word, legitimate mentoring when it comes to having someone not just cut their teeth, but earn their teeth while they're cutting them. Um, the other thing I think is we don't have enough seasoned practitioners in leadership roles. Our leadership roles in the performance world are falling to accountants, academics, lawyers, business, CPAs, MBAs. And it's great to have some of those people in the mix. But the fact that we have a very small percentage that have a practitioner background or coaching background in either upper management role, leadership roles, administrative leadership roles, we're really not putting our practitioners in a good position to be successful or progressive because the ones that are managing them, they have no foresight of performance. We need more Duncan Frenches out there.
Mm.
We need more of those personalities in some very high level leadership roles so that they can weaponize our highly educated practitioners. As experienced and as educated as I am, I'm at the mercy of my leadership in terms of how effective I can be when it comes to resources, when it comes to education, when it comes to bandwidth, when it comes to even the caliber of students or the caliber of athletes that we're getting access to. Um, a lot of that depends on how we're managed. So I do think for this industry to really take leaps forward, we got to have more of our experienced and decorated professionals moving into leadership positions. And I don't mean head strength coach. We've all had those positions. I mean athletic directors, associate athletic directors, deans, provosts, vice presidents of different companies, industries, universities, the ones that are actually managing resources and that can help advocate, but also weaponize practitioners. And I don't mean just strength coaches. I'm talking psychologists and dietitians
Mm.
and medical staffs, physical therapists, on down. The list goes on and on. So yeah, I think in the perfect world, we have more experienced practitioners moving into some high level leadership positions.
I do want to highlight your teaching feedback and the importance of being demolished in a program review. Because so I had this early on, and then as I went through it, it did get better and better. But a phrase that always stuck with me is "Don't throw shit at the wall hoping it sticks" for programs. And I was like, "Fuck it, yeah, I can't just throw any exercise at a program and see if it works. Like there has to be a sort of principle attached to that." And it kind of brings me back to that thing that you were talking about, where it's like know the origin of whatever method you're trying to imply. Um, I I had a conversation with Paul Comfort at a conference, and we were talking about no, it wasn't at a conference. It was during an episode, and we were talking about how in some degree programs you're only told to go as far back as 3 years in research, not further. To which I've always found that weird, but that's what my uni required, so I had to oblige because then again I don't actually think they checked, which is an issue in itself. But it kind of poses that question, okay, but like where is this principle coming from? Like how did this start? Who were the athletes? Who were the clients? Who were the people that were getting tested for it? Is it relevant to what I'm talking about, or is it just a citation to be a citation? And it kind of goes back to that intent on what I'm doing. But it's kind of this thing where like feedback, you can either take it personally and you can get butthurt by it, or you can listen to the words that they're saying and take your ego aside and listen to what they're saying. And so the way I did my degree is I did a year at college, which would be like I think it would compare to like your community college, and then I went to university. Um, and it's a huge fucking jump, like huge jump between academic writings in both. Um, I got a D on my first assignment at university. That broke my heart because I'd come from A's at college, and I was like, "Fuck!" But like, and the feedback was brutal. Like, I was like, "Oh shit!"
Mhm.
But then I separated myself from that feedback, and I was like, "Okay, what is he actually trying to tell me? Like, what did I do wrong?" And I think it's that thing that you're saying is like separate what they're saying and take away the feedback from
Sure. I
what they're
always
actually
say
trying.
you need to be able to digest the feedback. It's like food, right? If we just went off of how it tastes, we might miss out on something that's extremely beneficial for our system, right? So you let it get in the gut, digest it, see how your body responds to it. Energy levels might spike. You know, you might sleep better, you might feel better, you know, whatever, right? That kind of feedback is the same way. You've got to take time to digest it and see where it applies to certain aspect of what you're doing. There's going to be some parts of it that are just byproducts. Awesome. Throw it in the trash. But then keep the meat and potatoes that's really going to make a positive influence on what you're doing. But yeah, if you're wearing your feelings on your sleeve and your only response is, he doesn't know what he's talking about, or that really pissed me off, or you know, whatever, and you've just shunned all the information, you're gonna end up standing still. And you can never forget, like pretty much everyone out there when you're in roles like that, whether you're a student or you're an entry level coach or an intern or whatever, you've got to go ahead and anticipate. Everyone here knows more than I do, even if it's only minimally true. You've already opened yourself up to be able to absorb information. If your first instinct is, I'm going to show these guys how much I know, already you've closed yourself off to absorbing anything, even if it was only 1% of constructive information. So mindset's really critical in terms of being, you know, able to grow. Growth mindset is not just a slogan, like it's a behavior, it's a thought process.
Yeah. I've spoken to a couple psychologists in the field, and we are kind of talking about how like the growth mindset isn't also like just a linear progression. Like there is it kind of dips at points, but it's like it's your ability to keep consistently showing up and wanting to reach that better outcome.
Yeah, yeah. It's a relentless pursuit, that's for sure.
Um, you also mentioned it, which this is one of my favorite things to talk about, and I've done a couple conferences on it, and it's not measuring to measure. It's knowing what you're measuring and why. And I have this whole spiel on jump testing and force plates and how they're currently being used as like let's just get everything. Um, to which I have a really big problem with because you in some platforms you can get 100 plus metrics. What are we doing with that information and
Yeah,
why?
yeah,
Let's just pick one or two and and get really good at them.
sure. Yeah, the phrase, if you're not assessing, you're guessing. Like I've always held on to that. But the assessment doesn't have to be laboratory approved. It doesn't have to be the kind of quality data that needs to go into a peer-reviewed article. You just need to have some kind of metric or numeric value that shows that you're pointing in the right direction or you're starting to deviate off the course. Uh, so there's a million and one different ways to achieve that, whether it's a field test or it's a highly um, sensitive instrument like a force plate or some of these advanced sensors and things that are coming out now. But at the
I
end of the
mean, there is
day, do I just have something that can verify whether or not we're heading down the right path or we're starting to deviate from the objectives that we're after?
100%. I mean, they are a sponsor of the podcast, but Plyomat does this really well, where it's just like it doesn't overwhelm you with data. You can sort of make up your own tests as well, but it's just you jump, and that's it. You get metrics, you move on. I was also very fortunate to speak to Kenna Minichi quite a few times. And she has this whole system where she runs with West Point, where it's like, how can I make the testing easier so that they can get back to training as quick as possible? Because, like, again, I don't think jump testing should dictate your whole program. It should influence and it should um, advise, but it shouldn't solely be based on that jump.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've always I've always used versions of jump testing. My problem with it is in the majority of athletic endeavors out there, most of them are not reliant on vertical displacement. Most of them are reliant on horizontal displacement. We're not very advanced when it comes to measuring horizontal displacement. We're getting a little better with some of the 3D motion capture and things like that, but those are expensive systems to be able to understand how someone travels horizontally, or what force expression looks like horizontally, or efficient vector expression looks like horizontally. And then you get into the rotational realm, it gets even more theoretical. It's getting a little better. They're starting to be able to measure some rotational outputs via some different force plate and multi-plate systems. But when you look at the expansive research on vertical jumping, I mean, we have millions of papers that go back decades when it comes to vertical jumping, iso pulling. Um, there's quite a bit. So yeah, that's my only critique is for all the nerds out there. When are we going to get better at horizontal displacement? Because I would love to grab a hold of that information and use it.
Mm. Hey, you might have to do it yourself.
Right? Dr. Mann
um,
keeps poking me with that. Oh, you should get your PhD. That sounds like a PhD. I'm like, ah,
so when I was with him, we were kind of speaking about my research topics and what I'm interested in, and we then watched JB Moran speak, and he was talking about the big toe and how that plays, and like the importance of a role that plays in sprinting and like where you're talking about horizontal displacement. And me and Brian kind of looked at each other like, there's so much research that can be done from there. And like during our episode, we spoke some more about it, and I was like, I'm pretty sure he pushed some people to do some stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I don't doubt it.
What's a piece of advice that you would give coaches coming into this industry or newer coaches?
Yeah. New coaches, be elite at simple. I mean, the first thing I would say is get really elite at simple. It's really hard to resist wanting to get into advanced things. And nowadays, it's really hard to resist wanting to film yourself doing things and market yourself doing things before there's any expertise established. I would just say get really elite at simple first. I also am a strong believer in isolate, one or two things and master them. Whether it takes 2 years or 5 years, master them and then add, and then master those and then add. So, it takes decades to build your library, to build your toolbox. Don't try to do it all in your first year as a professional or your first 2 years as a professional. One, you probably come up short in a lot of those endeavors. And then two, everything you do is building your pedigree as a professional. So you're either building a pedigree that you're becoming elite, or you're building a pedigree that you're okay, or you're building a pedigree that I don't want to work with that coach anymore. So you have to understand that right from the second you become a professional and you're no longer a student, you're building your pedigree. Your decisions are really writing your resume in terms of what kind of professional you are. So master simple, be really elite at doing simple. Um, can't go wrong that way.
So I've recently read a book and it's called, I don't have it near me. I forgot the name. But essentially it's on how to market yourself better and push yourself on social media. And it's talking about kind of something that you said was don't rush to film yourself and post it. But in this case, it's actually explaining as to why they become so popular and so like the voice of that one thing. And it's because, unlike coaches with experience, they're not jaded to a lot of things. So what they're learning that there and then becomes like, this is the true fact of life, and I'm just going to post it. Whereas coaches who have got the experience is a little bit harder to post because we're in our heads like, okay, but
You know the
someone,
contradiction to it. Yeah,
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 someone could come at me for
sure.
not approaching this angle. So I find that topic very interesting because at some points I wish I was still that newbie where I could just post to post.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then my critical mind goes, yeah, but there's also this angle, and
Hmm.
you've not talked about
Yeah,
it. I find that very interesting.
yeah. Caution always comes from experience. The less experienced, they don't caution as much. I mean, you watch kids. I mean, they're just reckless, right? There's no fear because they don't know yet. Like asphalt hurts when you slide on it, you know. Then they taste that a couple of times, and all of a sudden they become a little more cautious. But yeah, I get exactly what you're saying.
And it's again, I think reading becomes a really important part of this role for that reason. And again, it's also knowing what to read, and I think that's the hard part. I kind of tend to not read things that I read the methods first. If it's not something that can be applied to the field or it happens in the field naturally, I tend to sway away from those because it's like if you're just theorizing what happens, that's not going to help me at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm relevance is a big one. If I'm going to read through something, it's got to be relevant, and then I dig through the authorship pretty hard. Where's the author coming from? Um, who are the co-authors? If it's a beta analysis, what are the beta papers and things that they're comparing to and looking at? Um, are they reputable? And if those things don't line up, I don't dive into the summary. I don't dive into the outcomes or the results. I just go to the next one. There's plenty out there. There's plenty to read.
Mhm. Yeah, especially if you're across in the US.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Bo, I really appreciate you for coming on today and spending some time with us.
yeah,
If you
absolutely.
can if you can let people know where they can find you and sort of ask questions and get some more information.
Sure. Yeah. My email is bsandoval, BSANDOVAL at TAMU.edu. bsandoval at TAMU.edu. On Instagram, I'm at bo.sandoval. That's it right there. Our new company, Workbuilt, is, you know what? I haven't memorized that one yet. It's I believe it's work.built. Um, that's the one there. We've got a lot of educational content coming down the pipe on that thing. If you haven't seen it yet, we did do a proof of concept short film. It's about a 30-minute short film on YouTube called Thin Air. And that's a kind of a proof of concept of work built. If you're an outdoor enthusiast or just interested in training and putting together comprehensive plans to achieve a goal, that's a fun watch. So check that out if you get a chance. But always down to talk shop. I always say if you reach out to me and you don't get an answer right away, it's not because I'm avoiding. It might be delayed, but I will get back to you. I'm pretty good about always answering. Sometimes just a little slower than others. So always appreciate the interactions.
I will vouch for that. You do always reply.
Yeah,
Appreciate you.
cool. You
Peace.
got it, man. Have a great day.